So let's kick off this little conversation here, and we'll start at the top, not the very top, not with Brian Kelly, but the top of the offensive food chain, at least as it is, written down that we think is the top of the offensive food chain. And we're going to start with offensive coordinator Tom Rees, Tommy, and so many things. We've talked about what the offensive philosophy. We've talked about so much that has to do with this offense, but Tommy Rees. In theory, the buck stops at the desk of Tommy Rees. So why, Brian, in your opinion, is this such an important season for Tommy Rees?
I think this, let's break this down into three categories regarding Tommy Rees. Number one is the coaching from a position standpoint.
Yeah.
Number two is coordinating. And number three is recruiting. And so let's kind of go in that regards. Number one, let's talk about coaching. Number one, you're inheriting a quarterback that is experienced but not experienced in what you do. And
Correct.
Then the rest of your depth chart is loaded with guys who have never played a meaningful snap. Well,
they've only been coached by you, though.
Right. Drew Pines played two. Came in and handed off against Alabama, right? I mean, those are meaningful snaps. I mean, that was they hadn't pulled their starters yet against Alabama. I'd say that's a meaningful snap, but it was
fair enough.
Handoffs. You're in a situation where it's time for you to show that you can kind of reload. You look at the top schools, they lose starting quarterbacks all the time. Alabama loses Tua Tagovailoa, number 5 pick in the NFL draft, and they're even better on offense the next year. We've seen this happen time and time again. Jacob Coker leads them to a national championship in 2015. Jalen Hurts comes in as a true freshman, not a 5-star recruit, not even a top 100 recruit on the composite ranking, leads them to the college football championship game. Then the next year, him and the combination of him and Tua go out and lead him to a national championship. So, then Tua takes over. They go play for the championship again. And we could do the same thing with Clemson. Year after losing Deshaun Watson, you have Kelly Bryant step in. He was not nearly as good as Trevor Lawrence and Deshaun Watson. We still led him back to the playoff. And the only game they lost in the regular season that year was a game he got knocked out of. So, that's just what the good teams do, right? We've seen what Oklahoma's been able to do year after year after year. So, it's time for you to show that, hey, I can develop quarterbacks. And right now, he's really, to me, the track record is spotty, if we're being honest, as a position coach. You coached Brandon Wimbush, who regressed to the point he got benched. You coached Ian Book, whose quarterback rating literally declined every single year he was in the offense. His best quarterback rating was 2018. All of his best numbers were in 2018. 2019, he put up good numbers, but didn't play well in big games. His quarterback rating went down a couple points. And then as a fifth-year senior with 5 starting offensive linemen back and a really weak schedule, his quarterback rating takes a huge drop, down to 140, it'd be 144 this year. So, and, I think cases could have been made that there's probably times Ian Book probably should have been benched in 2019, the way he was playing. But, again, he's got to show that, okay, I can kind of take this and we're going to really take this to the next level. What can you get out of Jack Cohn? What are you going to be able to do with a talented player like Tyler Buckner? What are you going to be able to do, with Drew Pine? Are you going to be able to develop different skill sets? And look, Jack Cohn and Tyler Buckner are 2 different players. How are you going to be able to develop those 2 things at the same time? And that's something that experienced coaches have to learn to do. And this is going to be a challenge. And I think Tommy failed at that challenge, if we're being honest, the first time with Ian Book and Phil Dracovic, but he was a young coach. We've all made mistakes. I think we all can look back at our coaching careers and say, boy, I wish I would have handled that kid differently, or I wish I would have done that differently. And that's part of the learning process of coaching. And it sucks that the kids are the ones that have to kind of suffer. But I wish I could have coached my first 2 years as a coach with the knowledge I had by the time I was in year 7. We all have those conversations.
It's a maturity issue. It's an experience issue. It's all of that, because I agree. There's things that I said and did, and the way I coached certain kids my first couple of years, I was like, wow, who was that guy?
Yeah.
But that's all about the maturation process of your coaching. And not to put words in your mouth, but that's one of the reasons you didn't think he was quite ready for this particular position.
Sure. I just thought Tommy Rees, as talented as he is and intelligent as he is, needed a little bit more seasoning. And that's why I thought Joe Moorhead was going to be the right hire, because I felt Joe Moorhead would have given him a different voice, than the Brian Kelly voice that he's had throughout his entire adult life, with the exception of 2 years. Right. So but again, still talented kid, talented young man, talented coach, and let's see him kind of develop and learn and take that next step as a position coach. This is an important year for that because I don't want to hear any excuses from Notre Dame's coaches about, well, we're not that, we're not playing well this year, we're not scoring because excuse A, B, C, and D, right? Okay, I don't want to hear it because teams lose players all the time.
Right.
You think Alabama's going to score 32 points a game next year? They lose Mac Jones, Devontae Smith, Najee Harris, Alex Leatherwood, Landon Dickerson. I mean, think of all the players they lost. You think they're going to take a huge step back, and you think Nick Saban's going to make any excuses if they do? No,
and they lost their offensive coordinator.
That's right, and offensive line coach, and running backs coach. So, because Charles Huff took the Marshall head coaching job, the offensive line coach left for Texas with Sarkisian. So, I mean, they've got and he hired Bill O'Brien as his new coordinator. So, anyway, the point is, there's no excuses, right? You're year 12. If you're not ready to reload by year 12, go find something else to do. So, I think that he will, and so I think this is a big year for Coach Rees, and I think that he's gonna be, to me, evaluated on how well are you able to develop your room.
Right.
So that's the coaching point. The coordinating part is interesting, Vince, because I'm going to make a statement and I want you to tell me if you agree or disagree with it.
All right.
Other than Marcus Freeman, Tommy Rees is the least fireable coach on the Notre Dame coaching staff. And I mean that in this way. Knowing Brian Kelly, knowing how Brian Kelly views his stubbornness when it comes to admitting mistakes with hires, there's no bounds. No way anything could happen this year that would that would result in him firing Tommy Rees outside of Tommy Rees doing things that he has no choice. And that's not who Tommy Rees is, right? Tommy Rees,
you're talking like off the field,
something illegal. Right. And that's not Tommy Rees. That's not going to happen. So if Tommy Rees is in an interesting situation because I'm your guy, right? You picked me over all this national search. He actually has a lot more pull than I think that people realize.
Yeah.
And I don't even know if he realizes it. And I'm saying I don't know because I don't know. I don't talk to Tommy Rees. He doesn't talk to me. So it's a thing where you got to be willing to walk in and have the stones to say, I hope that you're battling him as hard now as you did when you were a player. Because him and Brian Kelly butted heads a lot.
Yeah.
And I think that's something Brian Kelly liked about Tommy Rees, because that's why I think he liked Tony Pike so much at Cincinnati. He liked a quarterback that was willing to kind of go back at him.
I did. I liked that when I had a quarterback who would be like, what are we doing? I think
it's got to be done the right way. Right.
I agree. But I want to say that. Yeah.
But so I want to see I want to see Coach Rees be able to go into Coach Kelly and say, look, we got to make these changes, right? Like, I'm sorry, we've got to do this. We need to get out of the Stone Age offensively, and we need to push the tempo. We need to do this. We need to do that. And then, force Coach Kelly to give you more control. Not in a way where you walk in and say, I want more control, but just your assertiveness, your aggressiveness, your constant leadership as the offensive coordinator is kind of saying, hey, look, this guy's ready. It's time. And I think that's important because, look, if he continues to call the Brian Kelly offense, he's going to struggle in regards to how he stacks up against the other teams. And we're going to hear the excuses about they don't have this playmaker and that playmaker, and they only have 3 top 100 receivers on their roster, or 4 top 100 receivers on their roster. That's clearly not enough, to be good. They only have, the best returning tight end in the country. They only have a bunch of highly ranked offensive linemen. They only have, 1,000-yard rusher on their roster, and the other guy's just a top 100 guy, I mean, I'm being sarcastic here, right? There's plenty of talent for Notre Dame to be a 38 to 42 point per game team next year. And not just that, but a team that can also then score against the better teams in the schedule, but not if they keep doing what they're doing. And so he needs to do that, Vince. So that's my question is, do you agree with the premise that he has the foot? Because here's the thing. There are certain coaches that can't walk into Brian Kelly's office and say, we need to make those changes. And that's why I say I think Tommy Rees is one of those coaches, because he holds a unique position in that he is the offensive coordinator. He's your chosen one. And there's no way in heck Brian Kelly's going to fire him, because Brian Kelly's not willing to admit that he made a mistake. And I'm not even saying he necessarily made a mistake. That's not the point. So, I mean, do you think he has that kind of leverage, Vince? And do you think he is a guy that would be willing to wield it?
Well, your original premise was that he is the second most unfireable person. I would argue that
Marcus Freeman is the number one.
I would argue he's the most unfireable person. I would make that argument. Look, he is operating. You know, you hear about people operating without a net. You know, he's operating with the biggest net on the planet. Okay, he can get away from a football standpoint. He can get away with whatever he wants at this point, and I don't think that his job is in jeopardy. I really don't. Brian Kelly, the hiring of Marcus Freeman and the hiring of Tommy Rees were two completely different animals, right? I mean, it was two completely different situations. And I would venture to say that Tommy Rees is still the most unfireable person on the staff. That's his guy, man. You talk about how.
So you're doubling down on what I'm saying. You're saying it's even more.
I am tripling down on what you're saying, because I think that he's got enough in his back pocket because of the way, his relationship with Brian Kelly, the way the hiring went down. He can absolutely walk in there. I mean, shoot, he could probably just say it over family dinner. I mean, that's probably where they could talk about it. Obviously, I'm joking, but I think that they have that kind of a relationship. I think that there's a bit of a father-son, pupil, teacher. They're tight, man, and I believe that wholeheartedly. I think that he could go into that office and they could have a real open dialogue, and he could say, "This is what we need to do." Whether he'll do it or not, I think is the big question. And, we don't know what happens behind closed doors, obviously.
It may have already happened for all we know.
It could have. And
don't know.
And BK could have shut him down. We don't know that either. So hopefully it did. But I think he does have the gravitas in this particular position to do that. And I hope that he has or will do that in the very near future.
Because it needs to happen.
I agree.
And there's another coach that is part of this conversation too. But it needs to happen because they need to be able to open up the offense. And I think Coach Rees could thrive.
I do too.
In a more modern offense. I think
he's got lots of toys to play with.
Yeah, he could get creative and have some fun with it.
Yes.
And so I hope that he's given that opportunity to do that. Because again, if anything, it would give Brian Kelly the opportunity to kind of say, "See, I told you so."
Yeah.
All the people that said it was a bad hire. And it would mean nothing, because it's like, okay, by year 3, he's doing a great job. Well, look, that was never my issue. My issue was in 2020.
Yes.
You had a team that was designed to make a run.
Right.
And you didn't take advantage of it. But, I think eventually he's going to be an outstanding coordinator. It's how long is it going to take? And is Brian Kelly going to give him the ability to, I think almost kind of like he needs to be able to fail a little bit.
Sure.
And what I mean by that is failure is
relative. I mean, it's not saying
fail
go out
like
there and lose to a MAC school. Like, that's not what you're saying.
It's okay. The defense handed me my stuff the first week of fall camp.
Right.
That's what I mean by, you know what I mean? And I've had that happen. We've gone into camp and we thought we had a great plan for how we're going to start camp. And the defense just handed us our lunch the first week of practice. And then we had to make some adjustments. And by the time we got to the season, we were really, really good. But those things happen. That's what I mean by failures. But it's gotta be him, right? It's gotta be his decision, his game plan, his offensive philosophy, his practice plan, those kind of things where he can kind of go out and say, "Hey, you know what? We didn't get enough work in the run game this week." That's failure. So like spring practice. Hey, you know what? I set a goal for us to get through this part of our install package, and we didn't get to that because I didn't plan appropriately for practice. Those are things I think he needs to experience, success and failure with. And so that's what I'm referring to, failure, not like they need to start 0-3 next year and it's going to benefit Tommy Rees. It's every coach, I think, benefits from that kind of stuff. But when you're having things dictated to you in the manner in which I believe Brian Kelly dictates things on offense, it makes it a lot more challenging. So that to me is kind of why I believe Coach Rees is a guy that has to step up in that regards.
And the third topic on Coach Rees, I think, for me, is the one with the biggest question mark right now. It's as a recruiter. And the current cycle, the current recruiting cycle for quarterbacks, normally the quarterback is in the class by now, at least as far as I can tell. And that's I'm not necessarily that's saying that that's his fault or whatever, but I also feel like the guys that are being recruited by Notre Dame, or at least the guys that I've seen being recruited by Notre Dame, they're not the home run hits that I was
Right.
hoping that they would be going after, if that makes sense. And I know you probably have your own take on it. This is my understanding, kind of on the outside looking in. I feel like he could do so much better. I mean, I don't feel like he's reaching far enough.
Yeah, there's some quarterbacks out there that I know for a fact have a lot of interest in Notre Dame that are better than all but one of the kids that they're currently in my opinion. One of the quarterbacks they've offered I like a lot, and that's Gavin Wimsatt from Kentucky. He's a dude. He's a top 50 recruit. Steve Angeli, to me, is not a needle-moving quarterback.
And he's the guy that everybody's saying he's like the number one guy on Notre Dame's board. From what I've heard.
We'll see. We'll see. I mean, I have some skepticism about that because I kind of feel like if that were true, he might have already been in the class by now. But we'll see. Maybe he is purposely slow playing. He's not a needle mover recruit. There's guys like Drew Aller, who I'm going to have an article on, Sam Horn, who I'm going to have an article on. So the COVID thing, I'm not going to blast them for not having a quarterback by now. I would rather you wait to get the right quarterback than to get a guy early. I forgot about COVID.
That's a really good point because they're not able to
camps last summer. They had this class especially is going to be challenging because these guys haven't. It's been over a year. It's been about a year now since these kids were able to be on campus.
Sure.
And when this dead period's over, it's going to be over a year. And so a lot of these kids weren't old enough to really make visits. And some of the kids that are just now kind of becoming top recruits, they weren't necessarily top recruits when Notre Dame was last able to get kids on campus for games. I mean, they could bring 0 kids really in for games this year. So I'm going to give them a little bit of a pass on not having a quarterback in the class because to me, I don't really care. I mean, Alabama's, you look at them and them and Ohio State are going about recruiting 2 different ways. Ohio State's loading up early and Alabama loads up late. There's different ways to get it done. I just get it done, right? Yeah. That's the point.
I get it.
So, I have some questions about quarterback recruiting, but for me, the recruiting aspect of it is much, much bigger than just the quarterback recruiting. To me, it's if we're being honest, almost the best receivers they had in last year's class were guys that committed when Chip Long was still the offensive coordinator. With the exception of Rocco Spindler, they didn't add a single guy to the class that was a top recruit since Tommy Rees took over. You could say the 2 running backs, but neither of those guys were top recruits. I mean, LSU got involved with Logan Diggs late, but Notre Dame didn't beat out a bunch of SEC schools for Logan Diggs. Now, I think he's a very good player. Don't get me wrong. I'm not criticizing him then. I'm saying it's a lot easier to get a Logan Diggs when LSU offered almost a year after he committed to you than it is to get Logan Diggs when, LSU was offered him when you offered him. And
it's already home field advantage. I mean, you're already back from a
Audric Estime, they beat Michigan State for, right? He was committed to Michigan State, right? They didn't beat Ohio State and Penn State. So that's my thing is, I look at some of the recruiting and you say, okay, well, they just added a running back from Texas, very good player. That's a good start. But, he's got some areas where he doesn't have a lot of help, where we'll get into Coach Alexander here and Abdel Alexander in a minute, but, Chip Long was able to overcome that. If, you go follow the recruitments of Lorenzo Styles, for example, and Jordan Johnson and Xavier Watts, Chip Long was the driving force behind those. And Tommy Rees assisted in some of those. Tommy Rees assisted with Jordan Johnson to a degree. I remember when we first talked to Jordan Johnson, the coach who was recruiting him at the time was Tommy Rees, actually, not Del Alexander. So that was, and it was just sort of, that was his one of his regions, and he was the one that got him on the door and his foot in the door. And then of course, Chip Long came in and helped finish that. So, how is he going to be as a recruiter is not just himself. As I've talked to recruits that, I've had people that are doing recruiting for us now that have talked to recruits and they say, look, he's hitting the right buttons with kids individually. That's a good thing. But can he close?
Yeah.
Right. That's the question. Can he close with top players? Can he close with Caleb Brown? Can he overcome Michigan and Ohio State for a guy like Caleb Brown?
That's huge.
That's a huge thing for me because he is a game changer. And he's in Chicago. He goes to St. Rita, right? Catholic school kid from Chicago.
Right.
You got to get it done.
That's Notre Dame's wheelhouse right there.
And so, and they say, well, you got to be able to go into the room and say, hey, Lance, we got to get this done. Hey, Jeff, we got to get this done. Hey, Dell, we got to get this done, man. I need you to up your game because we got to get this kid in the class. That's what a coordinator has to be able to do if he's going to be a great recruiter.
Yes.
And you don't have a head coach that's going to do that. So you have to do that.
Yeah.
And so does a 28-year-old guy have the confidence in himself to walk in there and have that stern conversation sometimes with someone who's much older than he is.
Right.
But you need to be able to do that in order to make this work. And so that's what we need to see from Coach Rees. And that's, I have my concerns about that because, again, I need to see him close. And it's concerns because we just haven't seen it. I need to see him close.
Yeah.
And if he's not able to do that, then this class is going to kind of revert back to what it has been, which is a really up and down, inconsistent year. Same thing, offensive line, they got to close. Tight end recruiting is a bit head scratching. Running back recruiting is looking good, but they got to finish, right? Receiver recruiting, there's a lot of guys on the board, but do they lead for any of the top guys? Okay, well, then you got to come from behind and go get it done.
Yeah.
So those are the things that I look at and say, that combination of three things make this a big year, because the roster that you're going to have in 22 and 23 and 24 and 25 as you're looking to make this run is going to primarily be driven by the class you just brought in, which again, we had a heavy Chip Long influence in this class. And, you talk about saying, well, we don't have enough playmakers. Well, go get some, because there's some out there at places that are pro Notre Dame areas that you got to go get it done.
And that's the best part about coaching in college. There's no salary cap. You know what I mean? You can go get playmakers like that. That's my thing. You don't have to work. Well, we're in a small market. We're this, we're that. You're at Notre friggin' Dame. Okay. Right. You can go get, if you work hard enough, you can get those dudes. You can get them in the class, and they're eligible to play right away. This isn't 1962 where freshmen can't play. So you can change the narrative very, very quickly if you're at Notre Dame. And I think that's what frustrates the heck out of me, is that we hear that, oh, we don't have this, we don't have that. Well, whose fault is that?
Right.
Go get them.
Right. Well, first of all, they have that, but let's not go there, because you're gonna distract me, and I want to kind of get back on track. But yeah,
explode
agree. They got to get it done. And so again, we're not saying he's not going to do it.
Right.
We're saying this is his first class that's going to be his class.
Agreed.
Right, as the coordinator, and he needs to show that he can close. I like what I'm hearing so far. I'll say this as a positive. Talk to a couple guys that I have on the recruiting chart right now, and they're talking to a lot of these top players, and a lot of them, especially Midwest guys, they say, hey, I talk to Coach Rees all the time. He's really like him. So his name is being mentioned a lot, but okay, can he turn that into, I think he's cool, to I want to go play for that guy?
Yeah, right.
Big difference. And that's the key.